Nobody told her that at 56 you could still start from scratch. Nobody had to, because Margaret Walsh had already decided it on her own. Mom, what are you planning to do now? Build something. Build. You're 56 years old. Exactly. Old enough to know what I'm doing. Nobody's going to hire you at your age. You could come live with us. I love you, sweetheart. But no. Clarksville, Tennessee. Smells of damp wood and fresh coffee when autumn starts bending the oak leaves. It's the kind of city where what you do with your hands still matters. Where good work travels by word of mouth before anyone thinks to search for it online. That's where Margaret Walsh lived, in a red brick house with a front porch. The same one where she'd raised 2 children and spent 28 years building the kind of life that seems invisible from the inside but holds everything together from the outside. Her husband, Daniel, had died of a stroke in February, 61 years old, apparently strong. The kind of man who confuses endurance with health until his body proves they're not the same thing. He left on a Wednesday morning without warning, and then came all the Wednesdays that followed. What came next was this. A mortgage that kept existing without him, 2 children with their own lives in other cities, and 56 years of age that in 3 conversations with potential employers always meant the same thing. Too old to start, too young to retire. That nameless territory between the 2 extremes was where Margaret lived now. But Margaret Walsh was not a woman who waited for things to sort themselves out. There was something in her that had never quite found its channel, something that had stayed alive beneath everything else, like a river that keeps running under winter ice. Margaret had hands that knew how to bake, not basic recipes, but the kind of bread and pastries that transform a kitchen into something else, that fill a house with something that isn't just a smell but also a memory. She'd learned it from her grandmother, Frances, who had learned it from hers, in that silent chain of women who pass knowledge down without manuals, just by standing beside the next generation and doing, until the next generation knows how to do it too. She had baked birthday cakes for neighborhood families. She had prepared whole trays for school fundraisers. She had always done it as if it were a gesture, because people had always told her it was a nice touch, and she had accepted that way of naming it without questioning it too much. That was going to change. The first week after her children went back to their cities and the house fell into silence, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with a spiral notebook and wrote down everything she truly knew how to do. She knew how to bake. She knew how to calculate quantities for 50 people, just as well as for 5. She knew how to read someone else's palate and adjust a recipe without needing it explained to her. And she knew, though it took her a while to write it down, that her work had something that made it different. She went to talk to Helen, the owner of the baking supply shop on the main street, who had spent 30 years knowing everyone who baked in the area. Helen, do you know if anyone around here is looking for custom cakes or made-to-order pastries? For yourself. To start. Helen drummed her fingers on the counter. There's a woman in Riverside Heights who's been looking for 2 months for someone to make her daughter's wedding cake. Nobody has convinced her yet. Do you want her number? Margaret said. Yes. The woman's name was Barbara. She had a very clear image in her head that nobody had managed to translate into sugar and flour yet. Margaret went to see her with her notebook, and an attitude Barbara hadn't seen in any of the previous bakers. She listened without interrupting. She asked questions that went beyond design. She took notes. She sketched layouts with a precision that left Barbara silent. Then, she told her what it would cost and what she could guarantee. Barbara hired her before the afternoon was over. When Margaret got home that night and closed the porch door, she stood still in the hallway with the notebook pressed against her chest. She said nothing. She breathed. She went to turn on the oven. The cake took 5 weeks. Margaret worked every morning with that absolute concentration of someone who knows that what they're doing matters for real. Not because anyone is watching, but because something bigger than the order is at stake. It was the answer to a question her children had asked without meaning to when they told her it was too late. She delivered it 10 days before the agreed date. Barbara examined it piece by piece with the care of someone who is about to place something at the center of the most important day. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. Why haven't I heard of you before? Because I hadn't listened to myself before either. If this story is reaching your heart, leave a like right now and tell us in the comments if you know someone like Margaret, someone who started from zero when everything seemed against them. And if you're not part of our family yet, subscribe and hit the bell. Let's continue. Barbara ordered cupcakes for her daughter's bachelorette party. Then pastries for the morning after brunch. Then a friend called about an anniversary cake. The recommendations started moving with that particular speed they have when the work needs no introduction. Her children called on weekends. They asked if she was okay, if the loneliness wasn't getting too heavy. Margaret told them she was perfectly fine, that she had a lot to do. Her children noticed something different in their mother's voice, something they didn't remember hearing with that kind of intensity before. It was the sound of someone who knows exactly where they're going. 4 months later, Margaret turned her kitchen into a working bakery. She bought a professional oven with what she'd earned. She added a steelwork table, organized shelves, molds of every size hanging on a wall that had previously served no purpose. She gave it a name, Margaret's Table. No frills, no tagline, just air, name whole and complete, the way it should have always been known. Her neighbor, Dorothy, 62 years old, with a vanilla frosting that Margaret considered simply perfect, asked one afternoon if she could help on the busier days. Margaret said yes without hesitation and offered fair pay, because she had learned firsthand what it feels like when work doesn't receive what it deserves. The months kept coming. The business grew with the quiet steadiness of things that are built right from the beginning. Her granddaughter Emma taught her to use Instagram on weekends, with a patience that Margaret repaid in trays of brownies. Clients started coming from other counties, some from Hopkinsville, others from Springfield, which wasn't so far away if the cake was worth a trip. There was something in her work that people recognized immediately, without knowing what to call it. It was the care, that attention, that considered not just how something looked, but the story behind the moment it was made for. That isn't learned in any course. It's learned by living close to people for more than 5 decades. A year and a half in, she received a message from Carol Hendricks, owner of Elm Street Cafe, the most beloved spot in downtown Clarksville, known across the region for its Sunday breakfast. Mrs. Walsh, I'd like to talk about the possibility of working together. They met on a Monday morning before the cafe opened. Carol went through the photo portfolio with the attention of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. Why did you wait so long to do this? Because there was always something more urgent that needed my hands. And because I allowed it. Primera. Hua. Is it wrong? Carol nodded slowly. Could you supply the cafe with exclusive pastries for Sundays? Something people can't find anywhere else. I can start whenever you'd like. The collaboration changed the scale of what Margaret had built in ways she hadn't fully calculated when she said yes. It wasn't just the money, though that changed too. It was the way the world named what she did. There is a difference between being the woman who bakes at home and being the pastry chef who supplies the most recognized cafe in the city. That difference didn't live in her hands or her recipes, which were the same as always. It lived in how others named your work. Her daughter called one Sunday, Elm Street Cafe, the one downtown. That's the one. A long silence. Mom, that's something serious. Yes, it is. She didn't add anything else. Some things hold themselves up. It was a Saturday in November when Carol appeared in the kitchen doorway with a woman Margaret hadn't seen before. She was around 45, well-dressed, with the expression of someone who knows what they're looking for but hasn't found it yet. She had a photo on her phone of a European-style cake that several bakeries in the region had turned down as too complex. Carol simply pointed at Margaret. She's who you need. The woman looked at the tidy kitchen, the clean surfaces, the cake on the table with that precision that needs no explanation. Can you do it? Margaret studied the photo for a few seconds. She understood what it required. She knew how to solve it. Yes. Come Wednesday. With plenty of time. This kind of work deserves the conversation it deserves. I've been told you're the best in the county. Margaret looked at her with that calm that can't be faked. The kind built slowly over years of doing things right, even when no one is watching. They're still getting to know me, she said, and went back to her cake. That night, when the cafe fell silent and Dorothy headed home and Carol pulled down the shutter, Margaret stood alone for a moment. Clean trays, ingredients put away. The last cake of the day cooling on the rack. She thought about the spiral notebook on the kitchen table. She thought about Helen behind the counter, about Barbara with her bright eyes, about her daughter telling her that 56 was too old to start over. She thought about Daniel, about 28 years of early breakfasts and late-night conversations, about what he would have said if he'd seen the bakery, the cafe, the name people were passing around Clarksville. She knew because he'd said it once, after a neighborhood dinner where Margaret had brought an apple cinnamon cake and the plate had been empty within minutes. You've got something in those hands that you don't even know you have yet.
Maggie?
Daniel hadn't lived to see it, but Margaret had found it anyway. At 56, without anyone handing it to her, without anyone telling her she could. Building from a kitchen table, a spiraled notebook, and the quiet certainty of someone who knows that the right moment isn't the one you wait for, but the one you decide on. Her name was on the cafe's orders, on the word of mouth spreading across the county, and the messages from people who didn't know her but had tasted her work and wanted more. Margaret Walsh, baker, 58 years old. Never too late, never too old, just getting started. If Margaret's story has touched your soul, give us a like and share this video with someone who thinks their moment has already passed, because maybe today is exactly the day they needed to hear this. Subscribe if you haven't already, hit the notification bell, and tell us in the comments, do you know someone who started from scratch and made it? See you in the next story.